On everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Ad Podcast. Today we have an exciting episode for you guys. I've been following Tracksuit since I made it aware of them at Cannes this year. I've been following along with their awesome newsletter. If you guys aren't subscribers, they put out their insights every single week in a very approachable, funny, value-led way, not being marketing or pitchy at all, but just adding a ton of value. So I urge all of you guys to become subscribers of their newsletter. Connor is the co-founder and CEO of Tracksuit. Tracksuit is a New Zealand-founded brand tracking platform designed to make real-time brand metrics accessible, beautiful, and accountable. They track over 15,000 brands across the buyer-consumer journey. Connor, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Dylan, thanks for having me. Excited to be here, and thanks for all the kind words. I'm glad you like the newsletter.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I always like to start with an origin story. I was fascinated in doing my research today. Always excited to hear about brands like, Canva coming out of Australia and you guys coming out of New Zealand. So tell me a little bit about where you grew up, where'd you go to school, what got you into the industry? Let's start with the origin story.
Yeah, nice. I mean, my accent is all over the show, so just let me know if you don't understand what I'm saying. But and very happy to be compared to Canva. Well, let's see if we can follow in their footsteps for as long as possible. That would be awesome. So I was actually born in the U.S. in California.
Oh, no way. Okay.
And then moved to New Zealand when I was young, like 9 years old. Which is a long time ago, so I'm not going to say the date. And then grew up here, went to university here, started my first job here, and I actually was a corporate lawyer for 4 years, which I can't completely regret because that's where I met my wife. And so,
nice.
We left that together and went sort of wandering around the world, did some fun stuff like ran a surf and yoga retreat in Nicaragua, and then we ended up taking ourselves a little more seriously and landing in New York. And we both became COOs of companies, and I became COO of this MarTech business that was, early on in the vertical video content management space. And so if you were like McDonald's or Paramount Pictures and you were running a Snapchat account, you used us to do that. And that's where I met my now co-founder, Matt. So we were both, young and entered that world of MarTech. And we really became in that business, we saw the kind of rise of digital marketing and direct-to-consumer brands and everything. And then we also saw the cookie apocalypse happen, and attribution got really difficult. And really the source of truth around what was effective marketing kind of got quite murky. And so we were fascinated with that problem and came back to New Zealand. We in 2020, we both landed back here, and we started thinking about that problem, met with some great brand strategists and some great market researchers, and sort of found our way to this solution, which was beautiful, affordable, continuous brand tracking. And if you step away from, the next day ROI of marketing, what marketers are trying to do, they have the two jobs. They've got to capture revenue from people who are buying right now. They have to capture existing demand, and they have to build future demand. They have to make more people want to buy them when they're ready to buy in the future. And we like to talk about how pretty much every tool you've ever seen in MarTech or marketing is helping marketers effectively capture existing demand, get more clicks, get more revenue, get more of that pie. But that pie is only 5% of people. How do you grow that pie? And how do you make it more likely that you can capture more of it is if you make them fall in love with you before they're ready to buy. And so Tracksuit, we do hundreds of thousands of surveys on behalf of, like you said, 15,000 brands now. And we do those surveys with real humans every day to find out what they think and feel about brands. And that helps marketers understand whether they're building that future demand and making it more likely that they will acquire customers cheaper and easier in the future.
I love that. So, I think especially as AI is inserted into the conversation on a regular basis about how, replacing humans or making marketing funnels more efficient. But like you said, if you're spending all this operational and media dollars of this, attention on only % of the population, which might be in market for your service at that particular moment, that's a lot of white space, that other 95% that can either be influenced, like you said, for when the decision is, when the opportunity is right, or maybe they can be persuaded to move from that, passive brand observer into action, into, the channel of wanting to engage or transact with you, maybe earlier than you would have initially intended.
Yeah.
So I think it's so you guys are doing surveys. There's a lot of brand technology that's coming out right now around this idea of using AI to synthesize large data sets, whether that's social media data, other types of metadata that can kind of help give consumers an idea of what brands are thinking about. And then also, you've got the traditional kind of like focus group, get people in a room and talk to them. What do you guys love about the survey process or the survey methodology, kind of the larger digital survey at scale? And are you guys also thinking about some of these new ways that, AI can help supplement some of those capabilities?
Totally. I mean, I don't think, we would be around if we weren't utilizing AI to make surveying more efficient and more automated. So, a brand tracking study, a continuous brand tracking study 5 years ago would have cost $250,000. And that's why most brands didn't have them. You had to be a large enterprise brand to be able to afford continuous brand tracking. And we've used all of the modern tools available to make surveying more efficient and make accessing those populations of people easier. And so you can get it, instead of $250K, it's $25K. Tracksuit.
Wow.
And that's for a whole year of surveying. And that's I think, so all of those new fandangled tools and efficiencies are kind of one of the waves we're riding. And the other wave we're riding is that marketers are turning back from just being focused on the bottom of funnel. They're turning back to, full funnel marketing and building trust and credibility with folks before they're ready to buy. And that's happening actually because of AI as well. So if you imagine, AI coming into the fold kind of lowers the barrier to entry on any category, makes it easier to just like launch a new product in a new category, whether it's software or skincare or whatever. Like this is just getting easier and easier. And so there are tons of new brands, more than ever. Every week you're seeing new brands get launched. And so if you kind of think that through over the next 5 years, then trust and loyalty and like community and brand, all those things are kind of brand metrics. Those things all become way more important as a moat. Because of AI lowering the barrier to entry on every category. And so we're seeing marketers start to realize that. They know they need to understand how they're perceived and actually change that and improve it over time. And so that's where Tracksuit kind of fits in. And we definitely are like playing around a lot with synthetic audiences and using like, we use real human panels right now. Is there a benefit to using synthetic audiences? If we have the largest data set in the world on how humans think and feel about brands, can we feed that into synthetic audiences to bring down the margin of error on other market research? You want to find out whether your customers would prefer blue or red packaging. Let's ask a synthetic audience because the price is a lot cheaper, but you kind of want that synthetic audience to be fed by good data. And so the better the data, the real human data, the better the synthetic response. And so that's kind of, again, where we play is like, we have this very large data set, hundreds of thousands of responses every day that are from real humans that we're able to kind of utilize to create the best models.
That's awesome. Have you guys measured the accuracy of synthetic audiences versus your actual panel, since you have such a large one? I talked to another agency that partnered with USC the other day to study Generation Alpha, and they, had a relatively decent size panel through YouGov. They did, kind of the traditional focus groups in the room, and then they also did a synthetic. So it feels like a lot of brands are moving to kind of like leverage all three of these, like larger scale models, and then also more qualitative data, for like talking to consumers in the room. And they claim that they received kind of 95% accuracy from their synthetic audience based on the questions that they asked individuals in the focus group and people in the panel. Do you think what are you guys seeing from an accuracy perspective, and when do you think that they will be kind of fully trusted?
I think it's such a good question, and I think you'll get a different answer from almost everyone you ask. I would say that there are certain types of market research that are better lends itself to like synthetic research, and that is where you're looking for basically like a binary guide, which is either go that direction or go that direction.
Yeah,
And
it's almost like what do you call, like A/B testing?
a little bit, yeah. And also the margin of error doesn't matter so much, because you're kind of just looking for like, is it that way or that way? And actually, if it lands straight in the middle, that's an insight like in itself. So then you need to maybe go do some more testing. And I also don't think those are like one-time surveys. And I think most people in the space tend to agree that anything longitudinal is really difficult to do with synthetic audiences, because you get quite a bit of variance. And so you'll see things like, brand tracking, luckily for us, is a longitudinal study, and also like NPS and customer surveys is often longitudinal. And so those things are you are gathering the data from real people and looking at it over time, and that becomes very important. It's the time study that is key, whereas anything that is like one-off and directional is really can be pretty useful with a synthetic study. And I think, again, to labor the point of like, if you have really good customer data over a longitudinal study, or you have really good brand tracking data over a longitudinal study, and you can feed that into your synthetic models and the synthetic audiences, it can only improve it.
Interesting. I wanted to step back because I totally forgot to ask you this, but I want to spend just a little bit more time on your inception of Tracksuit. So, you had already gone to New York and you had been involved in MarTech. Why go back to New Zealand to start your company? Is it talent? Did you want to start it in a smaller market and like achieve, some level of success and stability, and then be able to go conquer beachheads? Tell me about the idea to go back to New Zealand.
Yeah, it wasn't related to Tracksuit. So we hadn't started Tracksuit when we moved back.
Oh, okay, got it.
So
Okay.
it was much more personal. Like we were in New York. We were happy. We'd moved out of Williamsburg, where we lived when we were young and dumb, and into like Clinton Hill, where we were going to start a family. And so we were committed, my wife and I. And then COVID hit, and she was pregnant with our first daughter, and we just sort of like pulled the parachute cord. We felt pretty lucky that we could, get out of Dodge at a quite crazy time. Yeah. And we went back to New Zealand sort of thinking like, oh, well, we'll just come back here and, hang out in a slightly less dense area, and have our first daughter. And then while that was all happening, Tracksuit kind of kicked off, and then we built a team here, and here we stayed.
Wow, that's crazy. So, I've talked to a few other companies that have kind of gone to Australia. So it sounds like for you, it wasn't like out of necessity or anything like that, but I've heard you can tap into amazing engineering talent in Australia and New Zealand. Obviously there's some quality of life stuff and some affordability stuff. Like, what's kept you guys there?
Yeah, that's all. I mean, there is great talent here, and the quality of life is high. We now have our third daughter, so it's been a busy kind of 4 years since we started Tracksuit, and so we're pretty we're happy raising our family here. But I think you can kind of be happy anywhere if things are going well and you have good community. And so I don't know that New Zealand or Australia are any better. It's just kind of where we we were at the time. And if things start going well, you're like, all right, let's lean into this. But I would also I think that in like wider context than just tracksuit, I think New Zealand, Australia is 1 degree of separation from literally everyone. And so as a launch a beta product and test it across a country, I think it's really interesting. And so we have, I guess I'm bullish for New Zealand and Australia to be great places to launch and build things before taking them global. Largely just because if you launch a MarTech product, you can basically chat to every CMO through a friend of a friend, and that's great validation, and you can find a few early customers and test it out, and then you can be right, let's go to a big market and actually have a crack at this.
Nice. And then what was the first market you went to after you kind of tested and did the initial proof of concept and got some customers going in New Zealand?
Yeah, so we went to Australia, but we're almost agnostic. We almost treat ANZ as one region now. And then we bootstrapped for the first 2 years. So that part of it, New Zealand and Australia, we bootstrapped and just funded everything off customer revenue. And then while we were in Australia, we started getting pulled into the US and UK kind of simultaneously. It was if you can imagine a Bondi Sands, which is a Australian fake tan and skincare company, right? We start tracking them in Australia, and they're like, hey, it'd be great. US is a way bigger market for us. Can you please track our brand in the US? And we're like, oh, we're not there yet. Sorry. But, so we kind of we built a cohort, a bit of a waiting list, a cohort of 10 customers for both of the US and UK. Me and Matt got on planes and, went and met people, and we're like, is this product market fit feel about the same? And then we raised our first round in order to kick that into gear once we felt like that product market fit was there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've heard some similar things from, I was just at Shop Talk, and there was this beauty brand that's kind of taking America by storm. They're really famous for doing product dupes. And I'm forgetting their name right now. I was hoping that maybe it would ring a bell with you guys since you are closer to that market than I am. But they said the exact same thing in a keynote at Shop Talk in Chicago last week, where it was Australia is an amazing place to test and prove out a concept and then, show that it would work and then export it, obviously, with the cultural differences when you come to, major markets, et cetera. All right. I want to jump into a little bit of, we were talking before we turned the camera on, you guys are doing a continual brand study, but you're also really famous for kind of helping brands understand the impact for these marketing pulses that happen within their, so brand isn't static, right? It's the perception is moved. And especially when you have big campaignable moments, some of the things we talked about is the Nike Skims partnership, Poppy and the Ben Stiller cola launch that he just engaged with, they're just kind of chopped from the headlines this week. So how do you guys marry longitudinal long-term brand study, but then also help brands understand how these pulses and product launches and kind of moments within their marketing calendar have an impact?
It's all really the same product that is underneath it. It's just the fact that we are doing surveys every day on behalf of all 15,000 brands that we track. You start to get we also ask the same questions for every brand, which is kind of makes the data more user-friendly from a query perspective and seeing trends and benchmarks and things like that. So if you ask the same questions for all 50,000 brands and you're doing it every day, then you start just seeing where things kind of pop off. And you can see when there's a new entrant to a category. So the Ben Stiller's soda, he's working with a great founder in the kind of CPG category called Alex, who's a legend. He's a friend. And so they've launched Stiller's soda, and it's really cool to see, because I think what we know about that category of the better for you sodas with Poppy and Olipop is they really have over-indexed with females loving them in that category. And I think there is a bit of white space for a kind of like male loved brand in that category. I don't think they're going to maybe focus on males, but there's an opportunity there for that to capture a bit of white space. And so that's something that we can keep an eye on over the next 6 months as they launch and gain traction, and see whether that plays out in that way. And if someone was using Tracksuit, I guess they would be able to see that white space, market towards it, and then see if they capture it. And then we wouldn't be talking about it because they would be customers, and then we wouldn't be sharing their data. But so we tend to publish a lot of the data that is interesting, just so people understand how, like, what brand marketing is and how you use brand insights to change your marketing strategy. And so I think, like, our purpose underlying all of Tracksuit, everything we do, is to prove that great brands build great businesses. And I think, like, another like an example of that is, like, I don't know if you've seen Touchland, that the hand sanitizer brand, but they launched years ago, and I like to compare, like, what happened in COVID. Like, there would have been thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of hand sanitizer companies that launched in that time. And Touchland are an amazing brand that leaned in to brand marketing and building a following and people that cared about it, and used the right colors and the right sort of marketing and content. And they got acquired by, I think it was like $700 million or something. Instead of just, making a few $100,000 during COVID with a smart idea, they turned it into a real business with immense value underneath it. And that's what we kind of mean by, like, leaning into brand and proving that great brands build great businesses. And the other, maybe, like, that's at the new entrant challenger brand end of town, but at the large end of town, you see, like, if you look at how Warren Buffett invests in brands, invest in companies, a lot of it is actually, like, brand led.
I was just talking to a guy who is early. I've talked to two early marketers at Geico over the last couple of weeks, and Warren Buffett owns Geico in its entirety now. And just the idea that, like, how just, like, I think of Geico as like, oh, okay, they're another insurance company, but a lot of people don't understand how disruptive they were. They were literally the first direct-to-consumer insurance company, but they built a brand off, it's easy to change your insurance, and it can be less expensive by going direct-to-consumer through the internet. And I'm butchering the tagline because the tagline is so effective, and, like, they deliver those two value propositions and taglines. And then, of course, like the caveman and the gecko, et cetera. So,
yeah, you don't see. I bet before them there weren't a lot of Super Bowl insurance ads.
For sure. All right, you said a bunch of things that I jotted down that's going to send me in a couple of different directions. So, 15,000 brands that you guys are measuring every single day, but not all 15,000 of those brands are clients. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So we got 1,000 plus clients that we work with every day, and then we track a lot more brands just to make sure that we understand what's going on in the most important categories in the world.
I love that, and that feels very native to me in kind of like the product-led marketing that I've seen you guys display. Kind of what I call, like, drinking your own Kool-Aid. Like, you guys basically take your insights, you distill them, you come up with points of view, you break it down in your newsletter and probably other channels that I haven't seen, but definitely I've seen it in your newsletter. And then you kind of push it out to the world. How much is your story a product-led marketing story where, it's the insights that you're publishing and sharing with the world that get the attention of that brand, and then they come and want to work with you?
Yeah. That definitely happens. And I guess there's two reasons why there's lots of reasons, but two key reasons that I think of why we kind of publish data. It's good for lead gen and people get interested. But also, like, if you think about, we want to make it we want to prove that great brands build great businesses. And like a lot of marketers, or we call them brand believers, people that know that investing in brand is a good growth lever. Those people have been like kind of beaten over the head for clicks and revenue for the last 20 years. And we know that if we can get more boards and C-suite, CFOs, CEOs, founders, execs talking about top of funnel data, like, if we publish a bunch and then some CFOs like, what's our awareness? Like that's a huge win for a CMO, because they over the last 20 years, their brand budget has gone from like 65% of all marketing spend to maybe 15. And they are the only ones in the org that know unless they get that to 40, 50, 60% again at some point, the business is going to shrink. Geico Insurance, I imagine their brand budget is 90% or something. Like that's just how you build big businesses over time. And so our goal is to get more people talking about top of funnel metrics so that it influences brand budgets and that companies grow long term, and that supports marketers to like do their job more effectively.
I love that. And are you guys able to help your clients and CMOs and marketers quantify the value of brands? You talk about awareness, and that's such an important indicator. Like we were just talking about this really cool New Zealand cosmetics brand that I would have just plugged for free if I could remember their name, right? But
Emma Lewisham? No,
it might be. Oh man, I probably wouldn't even remember it now. I'm not in the category either, which is probably another problem. But so like I think you're right. Like I think AI is leveling the playing field, making it easier and easier for challenger brands. You had the rise of the direct to consumer Shopify businesses, but that still took some degree of resources and staffing and know how to pull off. Now AI is making it so maybe there's 1,000 challenger brands in your category, but nobody cares if they don't know who you are and they don't feel something about you. So how do you help the brand marketer that knows in their heart they should be spending more there, and that performance is basically a source of income that has diminishing returns if you're not investing in brand? How do you help CMOs quantify that and tell that story to their stakeholders?
Yeah, often there's a huge impact off the first benchmark. Like the first time they see the dashboard will be one of the more impactful times. And so the marketer will have an inkling of where they sit in the market, the brand sits, but more often than not, the board will sort of think that they're up with the competition in terms of like awareness and consideration. But usually that's not the case. Like they've not drunk their own Kool-Aid, but they've been in their own echo chamber for a little bit too long. And so the first benchmark will be like, our brand's at 14% awareness and the competitor that you care most about is at 55. And so like, we need to invest in this. And that usually that's enough to change the budget. And then you're able to track what happens over time. And fortunately, brand metrics, they move pretty slow. And therefore the marketers sharing reports every month and just changing the way the board thinks about growth and starting to think about, awareness, consideration, preference as these like future demand, future growth levers. And so we don't connect the dots with revenue directly. We don't kind of see that as like, there are a million black boxes and ways to do that. And you'll see a new MMM pop up every once in a while nowadays. And we feed our data. If our customers have an MMM, we're kind of API first. So we'll feed our data to their MMM and help them understand attribution of that billboard in that city and how that works. But we're not solving that problem today because there are lots of people that are working on that problem. We believe the hardest part is getting brand data into that conversation and collecting a trusted, brand data set that everyone can sort of use as the common language for brand value.
I love that. Are you giving them any kind of advice on, what to do to move in the right direction as far as like channels, tactics, or, like you talked about white space, like, are there actionable insights to tell you like, okay, well, I know where I sit, or is it really up to them as marketers to then go out and work with their agency partners and their creative teams and say, okay, well, here are the campaignable channels that can help us drive awareness? Or I'm just thinking of like, is there a way to tie, the next step to like, okay, if I do XYZ, I can move my point by, by a decimal point or 1%. Just kind of.
Yeah. So, I think when we launched, we were competing against like slide packs. It was like 100-page slide pack was a brand tracker, and we built a beautiful dashboard.
You're competing against McKinsey and those guys.
Yeah. But then over the last 4 years, what we've seen is like, with the rise of AI, it's more and more important to draw out the insights and the learnings from the data. And so we've like where you used to log in and you would see a beautiful funnel and what your awareness metrics are. Now, when you log into Tracksuit, you kind of see the most key insights from all the data we have collected. And a great example of that is like in Airbnb's category of Airbnb versus Hilton, Marriott, and VRBO, and that's the accommodation services category. And what we know from, maybe we've done 20,000 surveys in that category now over the last few years, is that people move from awareness through to preference just based on trust. Like that's the most key driver of conversion through the funnel. And Airbnb are winning the awareness competition, right? Like they have maybe 87, 88% awareness, and Hilton are like 85. It's neck and neck, but they're winning. But Hilton convert way better through the funnel. Like they get people through to consideration better, and then they drive a lot more people through to preference, and they have a lot more trust. People know that when you go to Hilton, it's going to be a certain way. And Airbnb, I love Airbnb, but there's a little more variance in the experience. And I think so. Airbnb know if they look at the Tracksuit dashboard, they're like, right, the one way we can get to drive people down the funnel is trust. So we need to change our marketing strategy to, increase trust, change our customer journey, change everything about our brand and experience to drive trust. And we will move folks from awareness into consideration and into preference at a higher rate than Hilton or Marriott.
I love that. So you're almost giving them kind of the overarching insight into what they need to do from an action perspective. And then it's up to them, the campaignable moments and the UX and the funnel to basically act on that insight in order to drive that key differentiator, which you guys have identified as trust. And then that will help, the rest of the results.
Yeah. And we work really close, like again, we want our data to be the common language for everyone to talk about top of funnel and brand. And so if someone signs up with us, there's unlimited seats. And often you'll see in their first week, they're adding in their creative agencies, their media agencies, their PR agencies, and everyone starts to ideate off the back of this. And that affects the strategy for how they're marketing and how their product is showing up.
Very cool. All right. I want to talk a little bit about your guys' fundraising journey. So you recently led a Series B raise. What's been the biggest lesson you've learned from the fundraising process? How has it impacted your strategy? What's it been like, raising money and doing that side of the CEO founder journey?
Yeah, I really like that part of it. Like I find it quite fun and exhilarating. And I'm also an always on fundraiser, just like our tracking. But I tend to meet quite a few investors every month, maybe 2, 3, 4 a month. And just to you're almost testing your strategy with them. You can sort of try something new. And if you see them glaze over or they don't really agree with it, you're like, interesting. That's not really what they're hearing in the market. So, I like to meet people and we also get, a lot of these investors felt the pain of companies not investing in brand. Like if they're a consumer fund and a software fund, they've seen the rise and fall of a bunch of consumer brands that over invested in performance. And so then they're kind of coming to us, and you see them light up when you're like, oh, well, we just help marketers and boards invest in the right mix of brand and performance. And they're like, yes, that's what we need. And so often they'll say, oh, you should chat to this company and this company from our portfolio. And so we tend to get some customers out of that. So it's not purely a selfish endeavor to meet with them all. Our team benefit a little bit. And yeah, so I really like meeting investors, and the investors that have kind of like risen to the top that we've chosen to work with, they've just added a ton of value. Like they're smart, they're kind of similar from a values perspective and how we operate, and they're well connected, and they've introduced us to customers. They've sort of pushed us to go in avenues that they kind of felt were right. They have opinions, and they show up and do the work, which is kind of, that's how we operate. So so we've been lucky, I think, by being always on. You tend to like meet folks, and you add mutual value over the time when you know each other. And then when you're raising money, it's not like we're out of money, we need to raise. It's like just raise when there's an opportunity to invest in, and everyone can get excited about that opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty exciting way to, think about keeping your investor pipeline full, and that it's an always on strategy. It's not just it's not a process. I hear so many founders talk about, oh, well, we're in our fundraising process. It's like, it's more of it's almost like a lifestyle. But when you think about the idea that only of founders that get their seed funding, only 12% of them even make it to Series A. I don't know what the percentage is that make it to Series B, but it's a big accomplishment, and super stoked for you guys. So as we've talked a lot about brand tracking as an older discipline, and it used to be done on spreadsheets, and it used to be very expensive. What's the most legacy assumption that you've had to push against to get marketers that are used to doing things the old-fashioned way, or focus groups, or panels and different methodologies? What's the biggest thing that you've had to push against to break down old stereotypes, old ways of doing things, and get people to embrace the way that you guys have decided to do brand tracking?
That's such an interesting question. I would say that when a prospect comes in and a customer comes in that is familiar with old school brand tracking, they call us a no-brainer. It's like that's the quote that we hear, because often we're collecting the same data, we are producing similar reports and insights, but it's a fifth to a tenth of the cost, and they can access it whenever they want, instead of it being 8 weeks old and in a slide pack. So I would actually say there's very little that we have to do in terms of convincing people who have been on old school brand trackers to come to Tracksuit. But one of the hardest things is like when you find a new school marketer who's very like used to Google Analytics, and they've never seen a brand tracker, but they know, they've read enough blogs, they know that they have to start, their company has grown to a point where they have to start investing in brand and thinking about long-term kind of like, ROI of marketing. And they come into a brand tracker and they're like, it's not changing every day. And we're like, yeah, well, we did 100 surveys today. So you don't really want to measure like A/B test on that. You want to measure over the month, or maybe even over the quarter. And so that's like getting people, boards, marketers to remember that it's a long-term measurement is something that we like put a lot of education and cushion around the product, because when someone gets super used to logging into Google Analytics and A/B testing things over a day, it's hard to then reframe and think, oh, well, actually I'm testing this over, these two demographics over the next month or two, and I'll see how things change. So it's just that slowing down a little bit of that part of the marketing budget is sometimes difficult. Yeah.
That's interesting. It's, getting those performance marketers off the heroin, just like the idea that, I think we see cycles, right? And I think the quant performance cycle, we saw some explosive horror stories, even with big like brands. I won't mention them, but huge brands that have always been known for being just completely obsessed with stewarding their brand too hard into performance for a period of time. It's a seductive thing, especially when you can measure, and when you're delivering to Wall Street and you need to hit numbers. It's a seductive metric. Yeah,
it's hard you can't say it was a bad I mean, people will say this, but like for a while there, you could put $1 in the Meta Google slot machine and get $3 back. It's hard to ignore that. There was a period of time where you could make billions of dollars if you put $1 billion. It's just like, okay, this makes sense. Let's build a whole team around this. Like you can't be mad at that, because there was a time when that was the best way to get noticed and build a business. And then people, through that period, forgot about the long-term marketing and brand building side of it and thought that was the only way. And now people are recognizing that it's both, and it's not an or. Like you really got to stop. We try to help people stop thinking about it as an or. It's not brand or performance. You got to do both, and both are necessary to build a long-term, stable, growing business. And they complement each other. Good performance marketing works way better off the back of great brand marketing.
Love it. Can you tell me a little bit about the methodology to your surveying? How do you recruit survey takers? Is it incentivized? Do you have to drive traffic? Do you guys have an app that people, log into? Like, can you tell me a little bit more about the methodology without divulging anything proprietary that you can't talk about?
Yeah, no, this is common across all market research providers, but pretty much everyone uses, some of the biggest panels in the world. There's Dynata, there's Cint, there's unique panels in most countries as well. And so the most important thing is making sure you're picking really trusted, great panels, and that you're, sticking to those panels so there's not much variance in it over time. And then, one of the things we're really proud of at Tracksuit is you got to clean the data really well. And because we're a technology business and we use a lot of AI, and because we track so many brands, you're kind of using those big panels, but you're also able to clean the data really well, because you can see those trends and where things are off. Or if someone's copy and pasted something across 3 different categories in different countries, you're like, nope, that's copy pasted. We're not going to allow that in. And so you got to be cleaning the data well. And so that's, that, I guess, yeah. So the answer is we use the big existing panels, and we make sure it's really good data that's coming through.
Got it. How do you decide to add new brands? So tracking 15,000 today, what's the methodology for letting a new brand into the list, the growing list of 15,000?
Yeah, when a customer comes in, if we're not already tracking them, we'll track them and all their competitors in their category. And then often there's very large partnerships that we'll do. We've done white papers with TikTok, and we've worked with some Google data and some Amazon data to basically see how that whatever data they have is affected or is affecting top of funnel data. And so the TikTok one is called the awareness advantage, for example. And we were looking at, purchases and click-through rates within TikTok and how awareness impacted that. And so you can see all of these different correlations that are really fascinating. And that's kind of that study was one of the main, reasons that you're hearing a lot of people talk about brand and performance, because it really clearly showed how important raising awareness is for how effective performance marketing is. And so we'll do some big partnership and we'll throw those brands in. But really it's how many can we get in every month? And then we just keep tracking. And so we launched 17 countries in the last 2 months. So we'll start tracking a bunch of new brands in those countries. So that 15,000 should kind of be, at least 50 by this time next year. Like we want that to grow as fast as possible.
That's awesome. And I think at some point we talked about, the idea that you guys share a lot of insights in your marketing, and that's like kind of a little bit of the secret sauce to, on one side, it's like very specific insights about specific people to kind of create honey and attract them to you or attract their competitors to you. And then there's this larger idea of putting out insights that help educate boardrooms and the C-suite and marketers and how to talk to their constituencies about brand. But I also think I heard you mention that once a brand becomes a client, you don't publish their data publicly anymore. So is that, kind of part of the value proposition for a brand is like, they're like, okay, like once we become a client, we're kind of, the partner within this category. And then now we don't have to worry about our strategies or our brand stuff getting shared by this company that's doing this really effective tracking.
Yeah. I mean, our mission is we want everyone who's a Tracksuit customer, every brand that's a Tracksuit customer, to be growing more than the brands that are not Tracksuit customers. And so often, actually, like case studies are a great way to raise awareness. And so, like Stiller Soda, they would probably love for us to be talking about how great their brand is on the podcast, because there's a bunch of people that listen to this that might go try it. And so I would say, it's not that we never share it. It's just that would only be in the brand's best interest that we would share it. And
you'd share it in collaboration with them versus, versus if they're not a client, you can kind of do it at will and they don't get participation in how it's, how it's leveraged.
Yeah. But, I think if you look at all of our stories, because we exist to support brand marketers and be on their side, I would say almost all the time our stories are about great brand marketing and, where someone has succeeded and done something really well, or where an opportunity is to go after, rather than we tend not to drag anyone, because that's not our vibe.
That's cool. So you guys didn't comment on Cracker Barrel or any of that stuff?
I don't think, but that was an interesting, that is a very interesting case study from a brand tracking perspective, because, I think there are these core data sets that every modern CMO needs to be paying attention to. And just for anyone, the Cracker Barrel story, they released a new logo and everybody sort of didn't like it. But also there was a bunch of AI generated spam bots that were saying they didn't like it. And so the idea that, as a modern marketer needs to be paying attention to that and understanding, is that a storm in a teacup, or is that actually what our category customers, consumers in the space are thinking and feeling, is really important to know. And you need to know both things. And so I think, from a Tracksuit data perspective, you would see maybe a slight change, but actually a lot of that was over a 1 week period on X, and it was, 50% bots or something. And so did that actually change consumer sentiment? Did people actually think that or not? Is where a marketer needs to live and understand both. You can't be blind to what's happening online, and you need to be listening to social and digital, but you also need to be paying attention to what humans think and feel, and kind of deciding how much your strategy should change based on the difference in delta between those two things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that kind of leads us into the headline story that I wanted you to comment, which is, the Wall Street Journal did a piece on what you just talked about, this idea of bots, both from the perspective of spam, engagement, brand health. I mean, why would bots want to comment on the Cracker Barrel story, or why would it have an opinion, or who in their right mind out there would employ a bot army to insert themselves into this conversation? I could see if it were somehow political, if it were the Anheuser-Busch situation, or the Jaguar rebrand, and they were trying to tie it to politics or the cultural war at large. But Cracker Barrel is a freaking restaurant that people go to have kitschy meals at. And I could see hardcore fans maybe not wanting it to change, but then this idea of like spam bots and false engagement. So what's your opinion on like the state of, social listening, I suppose, as a signal for brand health, and, can it be trusted?
Yeah, there's issues with probably every channel and every data feed that you're getting in terms of like how trusted or margin of error and whatever it is. And I think again, like there's just a need to have data feed for every marketer, and that includes customer sentiment, customer interviews. It includes like wider category view and brand tracking, and it includes social media listening, and most recently it includes kind of AEO or GEO, whatever you want to call it, which is the kind of querying of where your brand sits within the different models, ChatGPT and the like. So you're seeing these new data feeds pop up, and there's the old school data feeds, and like they're all important, and a marketer's job is to see them, listen, and distinguish what's real and what's not. But you can't ignore them, and you need to be setting your strategy off of the back of understanding all of those different feeds. And so I think marketers have to pay attention to it. And I don't know why Cracker Barrel got targeted. I felt really sorry for them. It honestly felt like someone was running a test that they might use later on something that they were actually trying to influence. That's a theory that I've heard, but we don't need to get into conspiracy theories. I feel like that's probably too far. But yeah, I think that for whatever reason, there were a bunch of bots that had an opinion on that, and if you had the right data sets, you would be able to see whether that was true consumer sentiment or not, and you'd be able to kind of see the forest through the trees a little bit, because they reacted very quickly, right? And that felt almost like, I mean, I like the old brand personally, but it felt very reactive. And maybe once they realized that it was all bots, they might have been like, oh wow, we probably listened to a bunch of bots rather than actual consumer sentiment. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think you're making a very strong case for, you get like, yes, social is an important signal. It's a great channel to, make sure that you're addressing customer service issues. I think you can glean interesting consumer insights on how your products are being used in ways that you maybe didn't initially think that they maybe were going to be used. I think it's great to kind of see how consumers are talking about you against your competitors. But I think, like you said, as a measurement of true brand attributes or brand health, well, first of all, it's only the people who are talking about you on social. And when people talk about things on social media, they tend to not be honest. I think the same way that people aren't completely honest when they're called to, talk on a political poll. So I think the only way you could ever really, get honest, objective feedback from people about how they feel about a brand is like if there was a way to measure word of mouth, which, maybe Apple and Facebook can do, with your device listening to you and you don't know they're listening to you or something like that. But I think it's a good case for, having a deluge of signals, that you're listening to and not getting too responsive. Like I think you said, like you could see that tactic being used for short selling in the future, or piling on to a brand that's stepped in political doo-doo. It could have real lasting impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and more you'll see marketers have all of those data sets, kind of feeding in to where they're setting strategy and where they are, creating their campaigns, and be able to use all of that data together with AI to start answering questions.
I love it. All right. Well, I think that's probably a pretty good place for us to wrap it up. I am, like I mentioned, I'm a fan of your guys' marketing from the outside looking in, so I will continue to tune along and see how you guys grow this amazing panel of brands and how you pull insights out from your data set to share with us. From those of us who are looking from the outside in to get better at doing our jobs as marketers. Connor, if folks who are listening want to check and see how their brand is doing, or maybe are intrigued by the conversation that we had today, where would you like to send the audience?
Tracksuit.com. Hit us up.
There we go. There we go. All right. For all of you who are watching at home, if this is the first time you're seeing the Ad Podcast, don't forget to give us a follow on LinkedIn or YouTube. And if you are listening to the show, if you give us a organic or if you give us an honest review, that's essentially how we find a bigger audience on those podcasting platforms that you're listening to. And last but not least, if you have a marketer out there that you know needs to invest more in brand, or a performance marketer who is, looking a little strung out and needs to start thinking about the traditional channels and getting out of the getting out of the quick hit of performance marketing, or if there is just somebody out there in ad land or the marketing world who you think would enjoy the conversation that I had with Connor today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, Connor, I will bid you farewell. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Tim.